Hey everybody, Ron right here. I've been working on League starters for 3.25 for some time, and really hope you enjoyed them, but this video is a little different. Here I want to showcase a list of nice League starters that other creators came up with. I still included some of mine if you haven't seen them. I also checked the PoB and the builds that I recommend are detailed enough, so I hope you will enjoy them too. Let's see what kind of build we have this time. So first one will be Lacerate Gladiator. I think Gladiator right now will be the best defensive ascendancy over them all, because the amount of block that Gladiator can receive is just absolutely insane. It can get up to 87% of general block if we blocked recently. I also think that after all the bleed changes, Lacerate itself is going to feel pretty good. There's also some different options such as Earthquake Gladiator for example, but I still think that Lacerate is a pretty much all-around good choice. So I worked on Lacerate build for some time and you can check it out. I'm sure it will be tanky enough and the damage will come with investment as well. So it will be another melee build that I think is going to be very popular. It's pretty much Lightning Strike. There have been so many Lightning Strike builds around, but that time since we have a new ascendancy, I think Lightning Strike Warden is going to be pretty popular. And out of all build guides, I would go with Alcohol Lightning Strike. Mostly because it's very in-depth. And I think it's going to help you with a proper progress. There have been a few other creators who worked with the skill, but I think alcohol version is definitely in-depth enough, so it will be much easier to play for all of you. You also have Path of Buildings for both basic version with tinctures and version without tinctures, so I think it's very helpful. Check it out, and I think the damage of the skill is going to be very high, even if defensive part is a little harder to come by. Another nice melee option which will not be that popular is Shield Crush Juggernaut. Shield Crush Juggernaut right now can play like a pretty interesting hybrid. It can use Emperor, Vigilance, Steelcat Shield together with Replica's Darm Feathers. Both of those should work in a pretty good condition, and you will be able to get both a pretty tanky but a well-damaging build. And since Juggernaut is very tanky ascendancy, I think that approach to building will be able to rival Gladiator in terms of survivability. So Jorgen, a pretty well-known delver, has a pretty interesting guide for it. You can check it out. He has a pretty nice set of pathway buildings from Act 1 to Act 10 and a very realistic estimates in terms of gear for like week 1. The build itself is definitely promising too, considering all the changes, and I think Shield Crush is going to be better than people expect it to be. But what if you want to feel risky and play something which is melee but not directly melee? I have a pretty unusual option for you, which is Blade Vortex Elementalist or Occultist. I think that build been alive for so long already. It can provide a pretty nice damage and it can stack defenses just fine as well. It's definitely not that strong anymore, but it's still pretty fast and should be very comfortable to play, especially while clearing mobs. You can stack heralds, you can add additional ways to pretty much change your setup, or you can go fully ice damage, so with Hatred or Herald of Ice. You can check a Chronic Painless build for it. He has a very detailed path of building, and I'm sure if you're going to try it, you will not be lost. So even if the build itself is pretty risky, I would say it could be an unusual but still very fun pick for 3.25. Another pretty promising build is a Slam build. I recommend Sunder, Chieftain or Sunder Berserker for almost all people in terms of level and Marauders, because I think it will be one of the easiest skills to level with. You can check my guide for those set of slams, or if you want to play like Earth Shatter or Ground Slam, I have options for them too. All of those guys are pretty much in depth, as I usually work with the content, so you can be sure everything will work just fine. I also think slams are going to scale pretty good with all new Warcries, and the build is going to be pretty strong even in the endgame. I will try to work on the endgame version for it too later on. But what if you don't want to attack monsters yourself? There's definitely an option to play minions in 3.25. So I recommend you a Rise Zombie Necromancer from Gazi. Gazi always been a complete MVP for minion build. So the build has less defenses, because Necromancer can currently just rely on the minions itself, and I think scaling of damage is not that insane. However, you will be able to get a comfortable run through almost all the content, especially in further budget versions that Gazi has in his list, with higher amount of HP when you will be able to transition to Energy Shell. You will also be able to start with zombies and then move to the specters and skeletons. That way the build pretty much showcases you all the steps through different minion approaches. Check it out if you're interested in the minions. So another build which is totally not melee, but I still think that it's going to be one of the strongest builds in the league, is pretty much Ice Nova Frostbolt Hierophant. It's an Archnmage stacker, which is going to utilize Ice Nova together with the Frostbolts, and will be able to cover the whole screen with huge AoEs. Archnmage build has been very popular in the previous leagues, and considering all the changes, right now the whole build received a pretty significant buff to defenses, and it received a little but still noticeable nerf to damage. I still think it's going to be one of the strongest build all around, with huge AoE and a very big damage. So you can check Garata's build for it. It's very in-depth and it showcases a lot of approaches, including endgame and very tanky setups like with Mage Blood or something. So if you really want that high-end gameplay and you don't want to play melee, check it out, because I'm sure it's going to be one of the strongest that time around again. So another interesting recommendation is Totems. So if you're interested in the Totems, you can try to play Stormburst Totems, which are pretty much alright, but you will need to press a lot of buttons, so be prepared for it. So for Totems, I could recommend you Tetiantel. I think it's one of the biggest players who's playing Totems currently. Check out his guide, he don't have a lot of leveling process, so you should be experienced enough to pretty much level by yourself. But he has a pretty nice early map setup, and you will be able to progress with it and understand what you will need to do to start from early maps to a min-maxing setups later on. The build itself is pretty strong if you are alright with gameplay with Totems, because those could be a little strange. And the last build that I want to recommend is pretty much the build I recommended before already. But I will recommend it again because I think it's a very strong option, to be honest. And it's going to be pretty strong in 3.25 as well. It's Fearless Dumbar's Explosive Trap of Shrapnel Trickster. I think the build transitioned pretty alright in 3.25. And there's only one issue for the build itself. It could feel a little clunky because you will need to wait for your traps to pretty much detonate properly. Just keep it in mind, because it's probably the biggest downside and the reason why people even cannot like the skill itself. However, it's still going to be pretty strong. I'm sure it's going to be able to clear all the content, and the build just stays an amazing all-rounder. So even in 3.25 it's still playable, and check it out. I'm sure you will not be disappointed, at least in terms of numbers. Just make sure that the gameplay is alright for you. And the last build is pretty much one of the strongest participants as well. It's hybrid Hexblast Mine Trickster. Overall, Hexblast Mine has been a pretty popular build before as well. But I think right now it will have a proper approach and will be one of the strongest builds in the league. Because right now Hexblast can provide a huge amount of damage. Even if your survivability is not going to be insane and overall your HP and max hit is definitely not going through the roof, you will be able to do crazy amount of damage and just clear the maps before anything kinda hits you. Such gameplay could be special and it could be a little harder to play. However, it's definitely going to be very fast and will be able to showcase a very high amount of damage. So I'm sure that the build is very strong right now, and if you have enough experience to set it up and play it, you will do just fine. So that's been my 3.25 League Starter build list. I think all of those builds are going to be very decent starters. Some of them will be able to scale to endgame properly, for some others you will need to pick to some other skill to pretty much reach your final endgame power. Anyway, I'm sure you're going to be just fine if you will start with any of those. Thank you very much for watching and have an amazing league start, everybody.